Hello and welcome to another tutorial. I'll be covering foam in this one. Um, there is another tutorial on the website, so I would watch that one first, then I would use this one to fill in the gaps to be a bit more in depth. But I will not be going into the full. I won't generate the full resolution. So I haven't done any renders for this. It's just talking about how to get foam going. I can show you so. But if you go on the website, you can actually in the YouTube channel. You can see there's a few examples of actually generating foam. So this is one example of I think a few million particles and it is effective results you can get. For this one though, this is a simulation. I quickly simulated this out. I'll attach it to the bottom of the link, so just check in the comment section. You can download it and you can follow along after you generate the simulation, of course. So it's about 800 particles for this simulation, and then this will be the final, the low resolution foam. This should be the final, something somewhere like this. Of course, you will want more particles than this. It's just an example. The black particles are obviously the foam, and we'll be walking through how to generate something like this. Okay. Started. So I'm gonna start with a clean scene. I've got a cache. I'm gonna load my simulation into the cache, obviously, like that. Okay, so this it's about 550 frames, but we're just gonna look at the first few ones. In the preview, I'm gonna go to point mode because just for quick feedback. I'm gonna add another cache to the scene. This is gonna be the output cache for the foam particles. Okay, so yeah, with that you can actually get started. So all we need to do, and one more thing, sorry, we need the collision geometry. So make sure to load in the geometry you used to simulate, so the exact same one, and you will need to add this to the domain as well. So just click the R and geometry. If we go there, we will see it. Okay, we'll leave that open because we need to set something there. We shall go to wireframe and open up the meshing tab. Sorry, foam tab. Okay, so starting from here, so first thing I would do is switch to analyze kinetic energy. So the first thing you should always do when you're trying to generate any foam essentially is the energy. The energy, it dictates when the foam particles will be generated. So all these other values will be irrelevant unless this criteria here is met. So minimum energy and max potential energy. So this is kinetic energy, not just pure energy. Okay. So if we click that and we just say generate. Oh, sorry. And before we do that, we need to destination. Just make sure you got your source cache and destination cache, and generate. Okay, so with this, we're just going to go through the first few frames right there. Okay, and then I've seen that the max energy has actually stopped at 11, so it's pretty much I'll stop there. I'm just extend this just in case we need to go a bit further. Okay, so I saw that the kinetic energy max was 11, but I don't think that's right. So another thing you will need to make sure is that your resolution is correct. So I use the resolution of 40 here. So the resolution just dictates how small the particles are, and obviously if the particles have got a smaller volume than your actual simulation, they might be heavier and to give the wrong density, and you will get the wrong amount of the wrong energy pretty much. It won't give you the correct energy. So if I correct this error and I say generate again, what we're going to see is that the energy has dropped slightly. Okay, wait 1 second. Just make sure it's picking that up. Okay. Wait a minute, that does not look right. Did I forget to do something? Alright, let me just reduce this to make sure this is working correctly. Okay, it is working. Sorry. I think I wasn't paying attention. Yeah, so you can check, you can actually have a look at this. As you can see, the max energy is there. So yeah, that's correct. So just go back to 40 because I use the resolution of 40 to get the correct maximum energy. Okay, sorry, out of the small little there, I guess, inconsistency. So it should be 4, and we get our value there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave the max energy to 5, and then I'm going to lower it to 0.05. I believe that was the last, that was the minimum I put here. 1 second. Yeah, 0.05. So we want it relatively lower than that. Okay, so we can switch from analytic mode to generate foam. So make sure you drop your particles to as low as possible. I normally start around 10 because this is multiplied actually, so it's not just gonna per second per step, so it's gonna generate a lot of particles. So you could end up with 1 million particles just on the first frame. So I recommend starting really low. So yeah, just hit generate. Okay. And there we see some particles being generated, but there'll be a problem here. 1 second. You're going to see the particles are going through the geometry. Okay, and that's because Deep Rising will calculate its own normals for the geometry. Okay, so in other words, the normals, even though if we look at shading mode, they're actually flipped, they will not be flipped in Deep Rising. So you will need to go to your geometry tab and flip the normals. Okay, so they're pointing in the direction you want the particles to reflect. So if we do generate again, so yeah, we'll get our particles. This time they should not go through the geometry. And another thing I would recommend is to keep your collision geometry as simple as possible, because I'm not using the most accurate collision algorithm here, so hopefully in the future that will change into something that will accommodate like really small polygons and very complex geometry. But for now, keep your geometry relatively simple, okay, and make sure the triangles are big enough. Not this big, but no thin triangles in there. So, but hopefully in the future I'll find a better solution for that. So as you can see, we are getting some particle generations, not a lot, but as you can see, if we look at the foam particle count, okay, they're going pretty to 160, then they're beginning to go down. That's not because we're losing particles, it's because of the life of the particles. So 1 second is the maximum life, but this actually goes for 18 to 16 seconds. So that's obviously not long enough. So for the video here, what for this one is actually, for this, as you see, the particles are not consistent. They do disappear like real foam, obviously. So if you want the dissipation effect, you need to experiment with that. But the values I got for that are pretty much 15 and 5 worked for me. Okay, so the next important thing is to make sure your time step is accurate. Okay, so this is 60 frames here, so I was doing 30 frames per second. And if you're not aware what I'm talking about, is when you're simulating, make sure that you can just use the FPS tab. So if you put 30 frames per second there, make sure your time step should be equal there. Okay, so even though this would be different, simple calculation really, just 1 divided by the amount the frames you want will give you the time step, okay? And that will give you, that's for 30 frames per second. Okay, so moving on, the next important thing pretty much is the air potential and min-max potential. So after this criteria is met, it's going to look at these other ones, okay? So these you cannot see through during the analytic mode. You will need to generate the foam to see this. I'll show you in a moment. And then we will not really look at drag and buoyancy because I think these are defaults are pretty good. But buoyancy just means how fast the particles rise to the top and become foam. Drag is how much they follow the actual velocity of the fluid. Okay, so make sure your time step is correct, because if it's a bit faster, a bit slower than what you had, it might look like the particles are not moving fast enough or following the flow. Okay, so make sure these two things match, and then you can adjust these to get a faster moving rising particles or faster moving or particles, sorry, that don't go exactly in the direction. That's what drag is, that they don't follow the velocity. There's drag introduced into it. Okay, so I'm just gonna generate this. Actually, I had experimented with I'll show you what happens. Actually, this will look correct because we're not generating enough particles, so you might be tempted to drop air potential and wave potential to the really low, and you won't really see a difference here. But it could introduce problems later. These are pretty too low, and I'll explain why. So it looks pretty much the same, but it's actually producing more particles. I'll abort there. Now we're in the 1000s from the 100 and somethings, from the hundreds, okay? But if you look at the mean wave potential is actually 0, which is very low. Max is at 7. So that's pretty much in line there. But air is about 80, so that's okay, it's okay. But I'm going to increase the particles, okay? So I'm just going to put this at 100. And you will see that immediately, as soon as we start emitting particles, the foam will come out of the emitter, and we don't want that, okay? Unless you might want it, I don't know, depends what effect you want, but generally foam doesn't generate until something happens. Either the particles collide, waves form in real life, okay? Or air enters the water, you won't see any foam. So I would suggest 5 is okay in most cases. So even though this was 2, I put it at 5, I believe. I think it was 5. 1 second, let me just look at my other settings. So, oh yeah, so it was 16.5, I believe. 16.5 to get what we had there. So I increase this to 16. Okay, so to clear that up, that's what I did. So even though you get a few, these will be really small. They will not be seeable, because what you normally want to do is, for example, there is 800,000 particles here. I would multiply that by 3. Okay, 3 to 4 to get the actual particle, the details, because when you're rendering them out, that you really need a lot of particles. So for example, here, I think it's 3 or 5 times the amount of particles it actually needs. Okay, and the cool thing about the foam is you can actually have a relatively low resolution simulation with a simulation of the detail. So you want a lot of particles in there. So I recommend multiplying that by a factor of 3. So at 100, we're actually generating quite a few particles already. In the I think like 80,000 or 100,000 is the maximum for this. It goes out pretty fast. So yes, and that's pretty much it, I think. So just concentrate on the energy, and then after you get the energy right, after you see that there's some particles being generated, I would focus on the wave and max air. So okay, let me just explain what air and wave mean at home. Okay, so a wave, obviously a wave is like a peak. Wherever there will be a peak, a concave peak, How can I show this actually? A concave peak, like a hill, particles will be generated depending on the angle of those particles at the peak, okay? Just like in the real life. And air particles is pretty much, it's gonna, when air mixes with water, you will get foam. So when a certain criteria is met, so example, when the particles collide with the wall and they mix with each other, it's an estimation. Obviously, there's no air particles in real life. I mean, in the simulation. So this is just an approximation. The equation will look around, look at the density of the particles. If there's enough particles, it will generate bubbles. Okay. So in reality, those should be bubbles, not foam. So in the future, I'm trying to separate these out, so I can't find an easy way to do it. When they're underwater, they should be bubbles. When they're on the surface, they should be foam. And when they're in the air, they should be spray. So we need a way to decant these three types of particles. So, but yeah, because the equation is actually different depending on which state they're in. So when they're underwater, they will behave like bubbles. So the equation is different there. When they're underwater, they behave like foam. The equations are different there. And when they're in the air, they just behave like normal particles. You know, they just integrate normally. So that's another cool thing, but you won't be able to see this until that's implemented fully at some point in the future. Okay, yeah, so I've explained drag. Collision margin, you might want to if particles are getting lowered in there, or you might want to shrink the collision geometry. Mass, I would leave it. I don't think you would really need to type this. I don't know, unless in special situations. This just makes the particles heavier. This is not related to the mass in SPH. Okay, this is just the foam particles. So this ignores your underlying simulation. So 1 is the preferred route. And so 1 substep, of course, unless you want to match the exact time steps with your simulation, you can do that. Obviously, to take longer. The particles don't need to be as accurate as the fluid simulation, so you can get away with 1 step, 1 frame, so you get that the speed up for free there. And I believe that's about it, yeah. So I think I've covered everything. I'll just show you this one more time, what that looks like. So you get your foam. Obviously, this would be millions of particles for 800 particles. You need like 2 million to 3 million particles, but that's okay because we're only calculating 1 step, 1 frame per step, and it's faster than generating the fluids. Okay, and make sure you match the time steps so you get nice moving particles like this. Thank you for watching. Okay.